welcome to the second in the BRUNCH series. We're probably going to do a whole load of these as we approach December, just to keep people updated with what changes are coming about with the processes due to Brexit. This is number 2 in the series. There will be more. We're not going to do it on sort of regular events. We're only going to schedule them whenever there's something to tell you. And I'm very sorry if some people couldn't get into the last team session that we did. I have to say it was literally because too many people were trying to get in at the same time. But in all cases, we'll record either at the time or after the event. This one we're actually recording after the event because literally the day of the webinar, which was the 11th of June, there was an announcement from Michael Gove's team that night, which has not changed everything, but changed a few things, and it's important that we relay those changes to you. So, without further ado, first of all, we want to talk about the transition period. There's lots of talk about whether or not there will be an extension to the transition period. The actual official line is that there is the possibility to extend the transition period by 1 or 2 years, and that request has to be lodged by the end of June this year. The extension period can only be extended. Sorry, the transition period can only be extended once. However, that's now passed. The official period when the UK would have needed to request an extension to the transition literally passed yesterday on the 12th of June. So what we have now is that the transition period definitely will not be extended. That's why we've included an update. However, that said, although the UK have said that we will not extend the transition period, they have introduced some phasing in, if you like, of processes relevant to UK imports. And I stress that point. These processes are relevant to UK imports. They are not relevant to UK exports. They're not particularly relevant to the Northern Ireland Protocol, and they're definitely not relevant to EU imports. So this is UK imports only. So what changes or what easements have they put in place? Well, first of all, from the 1st of January 2021, rather than requiring full import entries, there is a kind of a TSP style solution. It should be noted that TSP was always a watered down version of a long-standing process called CFSP, and the EIDR section, IDA section that we've included on the graphic, is entry in declarants records. It's where you actually control the importation at your records end and then submit supplementary declarations against those records. This is very, very hot off the press, this. So at the moment, all we understand is that CFSP will be more generally available, almost like an auto enrolment. You don't particularly have to apply for it. So we understand, and it can be used from January 21 until the end of June 21. After that, you can of course upgrade to fully approved CFSP, or you can do border entries. We refer to it internally as a kind of a try before you buy CFSP routine. So it's very, very useful in that the first 6 months of UK imports will be a lot smoother than they would have been, and this will allow us to concentrate on the Irish flows and the UK export flows before bedding in the imports. So good news there. UK SPS controls, which is the sanitary and phytosanitary controls, will be relaxed for the first 3 months. When I say relaxed, it's pretty much non-existent unless you've got live animals, or as before with TSP, plants covered by a plant passport. Thereafter, from April, there will be paperwork. It will be kind of electronic and a paper process. So you will require export health certificates to import SPS goods into the UK, and it will require pre-notification on IPAFs, which is the UK version of Traces, but they won't necessarily have to go to a BIP or a Border Control Post, BCP. From July, they expect the Border Control Post element of that process to be fully operational. That doesn't mean every single vehicle will have to go there. Technically it does, but I would see how that develops between now and the middle of next year. And the last one, safety and security declarations. These are not required at all on UK imports. That would be the ENS, the entry summary declaration. Will not be required on UK imports until July 21. It's a very simplified graphic. I mean, it covers most things, to be fair, but the full guidance is on the link, on the really short, catchy link at the bottom of the screen. So, what are the challenges ahead? First of all, Brexit creates 200 million declarations, and that's only in the UK. So hence the reason why you can see that there is a shortage of customs brokers, because the current flow of import declarations or customs declarations is 50 million a year, and Brexit brings about an additional 200 million customs declarations a year, import and export, not just import alone. S&S, safety and security declarations, will be required in either direction. So exit summary declarations when you're leaving a customs territory, entry summary declarations when you're entering a customs territory. As we said initially, the UK ENS element, the entry summary declaration, is postponed until July 21. So a bit of softening there and a bit of good news. SPS, sanitary and phytosanitary. This is where you require either an export health certificate, a phytosanitary certificate, and the movement has to be entered on traces if it's an EU originating movement, or IPAFs if it's a UK arriving transaction. Couldn't find my word there, sorry. TSP, we'd said before, literally the morning before the announcement about this sort of softening of processes, that TSP has been cancelled. It still is. I don't think we'll see TSP come back. We'll just see a sort of derivation of CFSP, a kind of softening of CFSP. We're very keen on that. We were speaking to customs on the day, saying, look, we're all in support of easements, but don't create a different process. Keep the processes that will eventually be the processes, only turn the sensitivity down. Now, also when TSP was originally instigated, there were 6 series unsecured deferment accounts issued. We were originally told that they were no longer valid. Sort of hold court on that one. We're not sure. I would say that they probably are valid now, but watch this space over the next couple of months. But even if they are valid, that would only be in the CFSP January to the end of June period. Thereafter, you would require a secured deferment. We have to wait to see how that develops, but that's our view on it. Tariffs. These are the challenges ahead. The top 4 are the sort of headlines. Of course, we've got tariffs. We're going to talk about tariffs a little bit more in a moment, so we won't dwell on it too much for now, but it is certainly one of the challenges ahead. DDP, we've referred to DDP, although generally we're going to talk about Incoterms. It's very, very, very important to understand what Incoterms you're working to, and we're going to home in particularly on DDP. And then, of course, one of the challenges ahead is the border within a territory, which is rather unusual. So there's the Northern Ireland situation, where the movement of goods on the island of Ireland is free-flowing, and there are controls for anything arriving on the island of Ireland or leaving the island of Ireland. This is essentially because Northern Ireland remains in the UK customs territory, but is operating to the EU customs code. Really, really unusual process, causing quite a lot of difficulties in terms of planning, because there isn't a precedent in which to refer to. There isn't a process that we have to sort of manipulate to work. This has just never been done before, so it's a very unusual challenge, shall we say. So let's talk about DDP. We would. And we've issued an update that we've flagged this as being one of the items that we are about to update. So it's not a major update, but it's quite a significant one. So I'll tell you where it is when we go through this. So a common scenario is a European supplier, a UK buyer. The European supplier is selling on DDP terms, delivered duty paid. So they're intending to pay the duty that's applicable in the UK, and the UK buyer is buying with all-inclusive, customs done, duty done. They're just buying the goods that they bought before. Whenever we refer to DDP in this kind of scenario, you can equally include consignment stock. And I'll tell you why. Because the process here with DDP, and equally with consignment stock, is the buyer in the UK isn't the importer. You're the importer. If you don't have a UK legal entity already, then you need to either create one or create a virtual identity in the UK. All of these processes are exactly the same in reverse, by the way, but we're homing in on EU to UK. So if you don't have a legal entity in the UK today, then you need to create one, and that can be virtual. So at the very least, you require a UK EORI number, which would start GB0, which is a non-VAT related EORI number. That's okay if your products are not subject to VAT, certain foods, or most foods, for example. However, if your products are VATable, then you would be far better having a UK VAT number and an EORI number associated with that, which would be GB and your full VAT number, 3 zeros on the back end. In doing so, you don't need to have a UK company. You can have remote registration. You will require either a fiscal representative, unlikely, they're expensive and hard to get, or a UK VAT agent. We are a UK VAT agent, and we can operate on your behalf following your instructions, and we do that without liability. It's under a certain procedure. We ask you to give us a letter of a power of attorney for us to act on your behalf. We mentioned fiscal representation because if this were a situation where you're a UK exporter to an EU importer in inverted commas, and you are supplying on DDP terms, you may well need a fiscal representative. Of course, the situation regarding VAT, there isn't necessarily the need for VAT registration if the goods are not VATable. You need to note really that foods are zero rated for VAT in the UK, Ireland, and Malta, and nowhere else in the EU. So just because you're very used to handling VAT food in a VAT-free environment doesn't mean that's the same in every member state. So you may, if you're an exporter, you will probably need full VAT registration, and you may need fiscal representation. This is the updated bit. With a virtual identity in the UK, your customs broker in the UK would have to act on your behalf as an indirect representative. That's because the customs entry has been presented in the UK customs territory, and you're not established in that territory. Therefore, the broker has to act as a representative so that he becomes jointly and separately liable for any debt on that entry. This has been softened. We haven't yet seen the legal text on it, but the UK's approach has basically been that a UK broker, because there's a shortage of them, and they want them to be able to act for anybody. So the UK have said that a UK broker can act as a direct representative if the importer is established in the UK or the EU. Now, that's a major change. So that means on a DDP basis, rather, we can act for you as a direct representative. Strangely, if you were exporting from the UK to Ireland, we would act for you in Ireland as an indirect representative because the EU doesn't have the same relaxation. So it's a very positive move by UK government on that one. So what happens once you've actually sold the goods? You have to sort of almost take the buyer out of this. So in this DDP movement, you're exporting the goods from yourself, from your European identity, to your virtual identity in the UK. Customs clearance is taking place, duty is paid if payable, VAT is accounted for through your normal VAT returns, and the goods are essentially cleared into free circulation in the UK and can now move freely in the UK. Only once that has happened can you then supply your customer in the UK. It's essentially a domestic supply. So you would raise your invoice as normal, as you do today. However, the one significant change is what you would probably do today is raise your invoice and show the VAT number of the buyer using the reverse charge process. That won't be the case anymore. You could invoice exactly as you do today on your normal letter-headed paper from your normal address, but you would quote your UK VAT number and you would charge VAT if applicable. This is a domestic supply. This is your UK identity, your UK VAT identity, supplying your customer in the UK. Okay? So let's just do a quick sort of summary of what this is. So the significance with DDP is that in a DDP environment where it includes duties and taxes, the exporter is also responsible for the import declaration, the import duty, and the import VAT. So essentially, in a DDP world, the exporter is also the importer. Now, there is a quite a common solution to that problem in the UK, which we'll lovingly call DDP Light, where you can have a situation where your customer can be the importer and can account for the VAT. Not relevant in consignment stock, this, but it is relevant to DDP. Where your customer will account for the VAT at importation. Bear in mind, it's not payable. You only have to account for it if you're VAT registered, and they would end up with the VAT anyway. It's whether your customer ends up with the VAT from your domestic supply or whether they pay it directly to customs or account for it directly with customs at the point of importation. Pretty much the same thing, you know. So if your customer is willing to be the importer, then the customs broker can act on your behalf in the UK and charge the import declaration and the import duty back to the exporter. So in DDP Light, the exporter is the exporter, the buyer is the importer, but the documentation charge and duty is going back to the exporter in a sort of simulated DDP. It's a good solution. It's not that common in mainland Europe, very common in the UK. We focused on DDP, but we can't go away without talking about ex works. These are the kind of two extremes of the Incoterms. DDP is everything done, ex works is everything not done, if you like. Pardon the sort of double negative there. In an ex works environment, you're buying the goods from a factory in a foreign customs territory. It's not actually an export, and to be fair, the person that you're selling buying the goods from doesn't know it's an export. It's only you telling them that it is. So in an ex works export environment, that equally is a domestic supply. So the importer becomes the exporter and may require VAT registration in the country of purchase. So DDP means exporter becomes importer. Ex works means importer becomes exporter. Try to avoid these terms wherever possible. We much prefer FCA and DAP. FCA is one notch in from ex works, where it's actually free carrier. So the exporter is the exporter and the importer is the importer. DAP is a similar situation, delivered at place. So it's delivered excluding duties, taxes and documentation. So in that scenario again, the exporter is the exporter and the importer is the importer. The only true difference between FCA and DAP is that in an FCA environment, the buyer is collecting the goods, export ready, so the exporter's done the paperwork, and in a DAP environment, the seller is delivering the goods without customs processes at the receiving end. FCA and DAP are by far our more preferred options. However, DAP can present a problem when you're relying on your logistics operator or your logistics partner to handle the freight, the customs clearance elements. Because, for example, if you're an exporter handling goods on a DAP basis, then the importer, although being your customer, to the transport operator, it's just a delivery address. Your customer, who has now become the importer, does not necessarily have a relationship with the logistics operator. So if there is duty payable, it's fine if the importer, your customer, has the means to pay the duty. By that I mean having an account with customs. If they don't, it's very likely you'll find yourself in a situation where the goods are being held up until duty's paid. And that's putting a strain on the relationship between you and your customer. Maybe you hadn't seen that coming. So FCA is good. DAP is very good if your customer has got the means to pay the duty. If they don't, DDP Light becomes more attractive. So FCA is a good term. DAP is a good term if the importer has a deferment account. If the importer does not have a deferment account, DDP Light is preferable to DAP. But in all of these cases, these are Incoterms, international commercial terms. They're not customs terms. So in all cases, have a conversation. These customs don't set these rules, but it does have an influence on the value for duty and the process itself, as you've seen. So have a conversation. Make sure that you've agreed with between seller and buyer who's responsible for what, and be sure if there's any gaps, those gaps will show up very quickly when documentation starts flowing. So have a conversation. Now, we said we would come to tariffs, and we will. So the UK released their global tariff in May this year, and it threw a few shockwaves into the system because UK had removed quite a few tariffs in their temporary no-deal tariff offering, and then they were promptly reinstated in the global tariff, which was released in May. I have to say that the most significant thing about the tariff that was released in May is that it was released in May. It doesn't apply until the 1st of January 2021. Negotiations are at a very high level at the moment. There's all types of command documents going backwards and forwards, border operating models, the understanding of the Northern Ireland Protocol, and in amongst that pack was the UK global tariff. All of these were issued in May, and all of these are to keep the pressure on the negotiation. And it is just that. There is a negotiation going on at the moment. The UK doesn't particularly want to apply these duties to products that it normally buys from the EU, but equally it doesn't want the EU to apply duties to UK exports going into the EU. So the best place to start is the level playing field. Obviously, there's a kind of a side effect of this, is that if you have products that you normally buy from the EU that you're trying to do a trade deal on, so you have tariff-free movements, and you can ring fence that with a duty rate. So by saying to the EU, look, this product will attract an import duty into the UK of 10% unless we do a deal. If we do a deal, then that will still attract a duty of 10%, except not for you. So therefore you are protecting that free trade agreement with a ring fence of duty that applies to any other import where there isn't a trade deal. So duties are there to protect your domestic supply and production, and equally are there to protect free trade agreements. They're not necessarily set out that way, but nonetheless they have that. The big one is with free trade agreements, and we hear this still to this day, is, I hope we can do a deal with the EU so we don't need any paperwork. No, that is not an option. The only way you don't have paperwork is if you're in the single market. If Customs Union has paperwork, free trade agreement has paperwork, no deal has paperwork for sure. And the only way you don't have paperwork is a single market, which is basically a very big domestic market. The single market is full EU membership, so you can scratch that one off your list. Paperwork is coming and you need to be ready for it. What we've done, and we'll circulate this along with the recording, is a matrix of what processes, what are the elements that are involved in crossing a border, and then depending on the routes, which you see down the left hand side, which of those elements do you require depending on that route. So if we take across the top very, very quickly here, because the matrix covers it in more detail, an EAD is an export declaration. So at its extreme, you need an export declaration which creates an exit summary declaration, which is the border alert. The ENS is the entry summary declaration, which tells the border that you're coming. The import declaration can be in various styles, bonded, CFSP, full-blown entry, but an import declaration is required. In Brexit, what you have is an export is an export, and that finishes at the point when it leaves that customs territory, and an import is an import which starts at the point when it enters the new customs territory. So if you have an export, you've got to have an import. Moving on from there, you have an EHC, an export health certificate for products of animal origin, for example, or a phytosanitary certificate for plants, produce, certain vegetables, so on and so forth. Cut flowers, and flowers, and I've mentioned plants anyway, but anyway, flowers. Traces is the electronic control system for export health certificates and phytosanitary certificates, and also controlled goods generally. Very, very good. It used to be a bit cumbersome, but Traces NT stands for New Technology, was released at the end of 2019. It's very good. It's so good, in fact, that you would start to think, well, why would we require some of the other processes? Because the electronic tracking system's, as good as any custom system I've seen. IPAFS is the UK version of Traces. So the UK is saying that they won't have access to Traces. I actually think the UK is saying they don't want access to Traces because it's a European database, and the UK don't want Europe looking at what we're importing. Think chlorinated chicken here. So IPAFS is the UK version of Traces, which we use as an import alert system. BCP, or it used to be called BIP, for a border inspection post, it's now a border control post, and that's where goods which are covered by export health certificate or phytosanitary certificate have to pass through to be cleared before they can proceed. But it's worth noting there that you have to go to a BIP or a BCP, much prefer BIP, when you first enter the customs territory. So for example, if you are leaving from the UK to go to Germany, and your customs clearing in Germany, and you have a transit document to take you to Germany, the BIP is still Calais if you're going through Calais, because you can't enter the customs territory of the EU without first having the goods checked, particularly if they're controlled goods like phytosanitary or export health certificate. So right now the BIP is not at destination, it's at first touch point of new border. Keeping up? Fast talking here. Duty, okay, we know there may be duties. Hopefully there will be some sense and sensibility kicking in, and there'll either be reduced duties or in a lot of cases nil duty altogether. Bearing in mind that the sort of model a lot of people talk about was the Swiss model. That's not fully duty free. Most elements are free from duty, but a lot of agri-foods are excluded from that. And Switzerland doesn't have a big issue with fishing, I guess, having been a landlocked territory. But you can understand that fishing will have some additional controls and probably tariffs, because it's the most emotional of the lot. The table at the bottom, which covers the UK, EU, EU, UK, and EU, EU, by that we mean sort of France to Ireland via the UK, is the same format really. Only we've changed it slightly because we include transit documents here. Transit documents are required, for example, if you're passing through, if you're going from 2 points of one customs territory through another customs territory, so France to Ireland, Southern Ireland, via the UK would require transit to go through the UK. Or if you're going inland uncleared, so for example UK to Germany as we talked about, but you're arriving in Calais and driving through the EU to Germany, that would require a transit document to move beyond Calais and get to Germany. Again, the matrix covers all of this, but we just thought we'd run you through some of those processes. We'll keep that updated, but it's we managed to kind of cram that into one page, if you include both sides. That we're very proud of this document because we basically got Brexit on a page, and it's proved to be very popular. So let's run through a process of what that might look like. This is a production in the mainland Europe for ultimate delivery to the UK, and we've included Ireland here. So, as a producer, you make something, or you produce something. You then have an export order. Now, whether or not that's you moving stock or you receiving an order that you're now going to fulfill, either way, the goods are going to be exported. They're going to be moved from your customs territory to another customs territory. At that point, no truck here. We're not involved with the truck. Get used to closing loads off. A bit like, think airlines here, where you actually, the gate closes before the plane leaves. We would strongly recommend that kind of approach in Brexit. Don't be loading hot. Don't be, sticking the last couple of packages on the truck, still not really knowing what's on the truck until the truck's loaded. Don't do that. Disassociate the truck from the piece. So if you know you've got an export order, decide when you're going to close that load off. The truck can be on its way, but it's not there yet. Close the load off and create the export declaration, or pass us the data and we can create the export declaration for you. If it's a product of animal origin or a control product, you also have to create the traces entry. But again, we can do that for you remotely if you're not familiar with that process. Now, either at this point you've either sent the data to us and we're managing the entire documentation process for you, or you've raised your own document, which I have to say Europeans are pretty good at that because they export outside of the EU quite regularly. So if you're familiar with raising your own export declaration with an associated exit, then do so and pass us the data, or if not, pass us the data and we'll raise the lot. Truck's still not here yet, so already we've got an MRN, a movement reference number for the export, and we've got a traces entry, and we've got a barcode with the MRN on it, and only then does the truck kind of come into play. Obviously, if there are products of animal origin, you have to coordinate the truck so that the vet is there to supervise the loading. We have to see how that would develop, but right now we want to sort of, aside from the export health certificate, we want to disassociate the truck with the sort of loading process. Otherwise, we're waiting too long to start the customs documentation. So the truck is now ready to load. The truck's ready to leave. Pass the MRN details to the truck, to the transporter, or to the driver. You don't actually need to, because it can be done electronically in parallel. But drivers like pieces of paper, so the driver's going to want a copy of the export declaration with the MRN on it, the barcode on it, because he'd rather set off with that than without that. If it's an export health certificate also involved, he has to have the original document of that. Truck's now on your premises. In the background, on the port system, and we're using Calais as an example here, on the port system we're loading the MRNs into something called the logistics envelope, which is the port sort of inventory system. And we're also at the same time now creating the UK import declaration. Now, bear in mind there may be some relaxation with this, but this will end up being the process. It's just maybe the start date might be slightly staggered. But we would be raising the UK import declaration, because the process is you can't leave for the UK unless your import declaration is already in place. So the import declaration will be processed. Truck's nowhere near Calais yet. That's submitted to customs, an entry number has come back, and we also add that to the port system. Now at the moment that was looking, until about 2 days ago, that was looking like that would also be the logistics envelope, but right now we think it's going to be something called the VMS, the Vehicle Management System, which UK Customs are putting in place so that there is that control. So where you may have the logistics envelope for the EU export from Calais, you will have the VMS for the UK import, so there is some record of some inventory really of what's crossing the channel. In all cases as well, we're worried about the truck. There might be situations where we're loading MRNs and vehicle information at a port and the truck doesn't go to that port, it goes to a different location, which is fine, but as much as possible we might not know the trucking company. So we want to try and communicate with them. We've created on our website, and we'll include the link, an area where your transporter can register his trucks. We're not after any technical information. We just want to know truck number, trailer number, who would be the email contact for that vehicle if we were ever to see it on a document, so that we know that if we're creating a document and sharing the number with you, the essential MRN number, we're also sharing it with the transport company. Okay, so as much as possible, point your transport people to that screen so that they can register.
Just a sec.
Siri has woken up for some reason. There are also additional controls in the UK, not, as we said, not initially, but there would be the ENS, the Entry Summary Declaration. This, as we said, will be postponed until July 21, and there will be the IPAFS notification if the goods are products of animal origin, and again that won't be until April 21. So, but it's coming, so you may as well plan for it. Okay. We're still not at Calais yet, by the way. We are at Calais now. We're now approaching Calais. The logistics envelope is lodged. The MRNs and the truck number are associated, and the ANPR camera will now pick up that registration, open the logistics envelope, process those MRNs, which has an effect of closing the export at that point. So the export's now taken place, and your VAT liability is discharged. Bear in mind that exports are zero rated for VAT, and the export declaration is therefore vital, that once you put the goods under customs control, the export declaration has to be flagged as you leave that customs territory in order to prove the export's happened, and therefore that you're not liable for the VAT as the exporter. So the ANPR camera picks up the registration number, opens the logistics envelope, retrieves the MRNs, closes the exports, and lets the vehicle into the port in the click of a hand. The one sure way of not being allowed in the port is don't do anything with the logistics envelope. You can't enter the port of Calais en route to the UK unless you're exporting, and if you've not got your paperwork in the logistics envelope, you're clearly not ready to export and you can't come in. Equally, once you're in the port of Calais, because you're allowed to export, you can't leave unless your UK import is in place. Now again, initially there may be some relaxation with that, where you will only require a record on the VMS, the Vehicle Management System, or you may, by July 21, you will require some form of full document in order to proceed. So again, plan for it. So don't take the relaxation as being the process. It's merely a phasing in of the process. So you're allowed in the port because you got your export, and now you're allowed to leave the port because your import is in place. No import declaration, you're not getting on the boat or the train. You're now in the UK, and pretty much job done, I have to say, apart from the UK vet check, which won't start formally until July 21. The reason for that is they don't know where it is yet. They've got to build border inspection posts. They don't particularly want them at the ports because there isn't any room, and there's also obvious bottlenecks. So the location is unknown, hence the map. And equally, they won't start for a year from now. So it will happen. We don't know where, we don't know when. Well, we do roughly know when, but we don't know where yet. There may be multiple locations. So right now, even if you've got products of animal origin, you've arrived in the UK and you're straight through on the motorway, and you're basically straight through to delivery. We call that landed because that might be a direct delivery, might be into warehouse, might be into bond. The customs entry that was done as a pre-lodgement is now finalised, and the duty is taken from the account. It's not actually, the payment's not taken yet, but the duty is associated with the account that's paying the duty, and it's now irrevocable. Finished. That's the job done. You're now, the goods are imported. That's the entire process taken care of. And as you can see in that, a lot of it can run concurrently and not actually interfere with the movement of the truck, providing you get everything in the right place at the right time. This is why we've said in a lot of cases the training is not so much about the technicalities of doing customs documentation, but it's the sequencing and management of the processes required. Now, we've still left a little piece here in the grey area with a calendar on it, only because if the goods are for home use, they would have been cleared when they arrived and duty paid, but that's only if the goods are for the UK. If the goods aren't for the UK, for example, they may be moved on to, they're going into storage and they're either for the UK market or the Irish market, very, very popular, very common with foods, then there's still a bonded entry to do. Goods are now in duty suspension, and the stock is controlled in a bonded environment. no duty has been paid. The thing about bonded warehousing, you don't pay duty on arrival, you pay duty on exit from bond. So everything comes into duty suspension. And normally that's done because you're ordering large stocks and there's a very high duty rate. But in BREXIT, and particularly with Ireland, this is because you don't know where the goods are going, and you don't want to pay duty in the UK if the goods are actually eventually going to go to Ireland and you just wasted paying duty in the UK. So the stock is controlled. The order comes through of where those goods are going to go. If it is in bond, if it's now for the UK market, it's converting into something called home use, and the duty is paid as it would have been before. Or if it's for Ireland, a transit document or an onward movement document is done so that the duty is not paid in the UK, and the process is now moved on to Ireland, where the transaction will close. And bearing in mind that's essentially an EU to EU transaction, there would be no duty payable. Health certificates become a whole new issue. We're waiting to see how those are defined, but at least the duty could be saved. Of course, all of this is academic if the duty rates are nil, but it's important to cover it because right now the duty rates in most cases certainly aren't nil. So once all that process has taken place, and again it's pretty concurrent, there's still no, you're not receiving an order and immediately loading a truck. So you're receiving an order, processing, picking the order, doing the paperwork, doing the customs, and then the truck's ready to go. So that's an end-to-end of a fairly complicated process. On future brunch events, we'll take different routes of UK export, transit through Ireland. We have mapped 50 of these, I have to say, and not because we've created them. There are 50 variations. It's no two seem to be the same, and some ports handle things in slightly different ways. So we certainly won't do a walkthrough of all 50 of them, but we'll take the most common and do those in future brunch events where we walk through the process. So what do we do? Well, the Customs Clearance Consortium was set up because we were watching this, and I mean, my background is that anyway. I was a customs agent from when I left school because I grew up in Dover, and that's one of the things you did. I also, from 2012 to 2017, I ran the customs freight terminal at the Port of Dover, so my knowledge is fairly up to date. Prior to that, P&O ferries, prior to that, Eurotunnel. So, I get the border piece. So one of the things we did do though is we were helping a lot of customers get ready, a lot of clients get ready for Brexit, and of course we kept finding ourselves thinking, well, you're going to need an agent here, and the problem was there was a lack of agents. There is an absolute lack of agents because if the paperwork is going up fivefold, no customs broker is currently sitting there with 5 times the amount of staff that they require. So they need to recruit. But when do you recruit? The problem is the date keeps moving, particularly Theresa May's period. So every time you were recruiting, and that, how much staffing costs are, just in your own business. So all the time you're recruiting, and then with the sweep of a pen, somebody says, "Oh, it's off for another 6 months." You're then laying those people off again. But who's paying for all of this? So the government have said that they would actually contribute towards that, but only a quarter of the starting salary. So it all becomes quite reactive at that point. So the numbers that are required to actually form the solution won't be required until potentially 4 months before the solution is required. So we're not expecting to see huge recruitment until September, October, November. No, okay, it takes years to learn how to do the job, but it doesn't take years to learn how to do simplified frontier declarations or European entries. It takes years to learn how to do the difficult entries. It takes, honestly, days to learn how to do the simple ones. The trick is making sure that the person who can only do the simple entries isn't exposed to the difficult entries, because they'll make an absolute mess of them, I'm afraid, because there's so many different intricacies involved. So our fear, though, with standard port brokerage systems is that they're a little bit reactive, is that you'll load the truck, send the packing list and invoice to the agent, and he'll knock up all the paperwork. I mean, I'm obviously oversimplifying that, but already we've now got a truck wandering around looking for paperwork. Everything's become a bit reactive. What we want to do is get much further down the line and get things done much earlier in the process. So one of the reasons for that is that when it all gets going, there's no phasing. But bear in mind, this was written on the 11th. On the evening of the 11th, the government released their relaxation of imports. So there is actually some phasing now, and we're very supportive of what the government came up with, because it means we can concentrate on bedding in the UK Ireland flows in both directions. We can bed in the UK export flows, and of course with the corresponding EU imports. And then by July, we know we've got to be fully ready for UK imports. So it's still a push. It's still very hard, but this phasing that's been introduced by Michael Gove's team is absolutely welcome by us. It just means we can manage it differently. So what did we do? Well, we sat off this and got together with lots of different logistics companies and said, we can't all wait for people to form this, to be ready to provide the solution that you're after. We need to actually create the solution now and be part of it. So the consortium is made up of logistics companies who all share the same sort of concerns, and they all invest in the consortium whose only job is to provide solutions for Brexit. We're often asked if we can do customs clearance for containers at Felixstowe, air freight, and the answer is no. That already has a home, and it is not broken and not about to be broken. What is about to be broken is this 200 million additional declarations which is winging our way. So we are setting up purely for the additional, for the work that needs doing, not the work that's already being done by somebody and we're going to knock a fiver off their rate and try and nick the business. Not our concern. We're only looking for this work that's coming in that is likely to create barriers if it's not handled correctly. So because of that, we get very proactive. We get right under the skin. We're involved in a lot of swim lane diagram flows with our logistics partners so that we can see straight away where we interact. And in a lot of cases, we're interacting with the logistics company's client before they are. So the exporter is contacting us, getting an MRN, and then ringing the logistics company, or at very least they're doing it in parallel. So we're getting, pushing the line much further back so that the truck isn't the be all and end all in this piece. The truck just moves the freight, but everything else is running. It's the swan on the lake, it's really smooth, but underneath feet are going like mad. That's the process. Why can't we do that? And that's what we're doing. We also expect to handle at least 2 million declarations a year. I mean, they're big numbers, but even with the numbers that we're putting in with with a lot of robotics and a lot of staff, we're still looking at handling probably around about 1% of the new volume. But there's only so much we can do. We don't want to take on more than we think 2 million is manageable. More than that, we are starting to push the envelope a bit, because equally we're going to do all of that 24 hours a day. A wasp has just flown into my office, so if you hear a buzzing noise, it's the wasp. It's not me. Right now, we've built all the bits we need to build, and it's now all about data. And we've said a lot about customs training. Do customs training. The UK Academy is very good. We've got customs training. BIFA's got customs training. Strong and Herd have got great customs training. Embrace the customs training, but don't just do the customs training because you're planning to do the customs paperwork. And in fact, don't try and do the customs paperwork from day one unless you've got some skills in that department. Do the training so you know what's required and you know the context of everything. The context is more important than any other piece of this. And absolutely concentrate all of your time on data. This quote for us is, I think it's very strong. Nothing moves without data. And for us, all of our work at the moment is about data. From one piece of information, if we get the right format and the right data packs together, we can create the export, the transit, the exit summary, the entry summary, the import entry. We can notify the border inspection post. We can do the traces entry. We can update IPAFs, all from one slice of data. You'd be amazed what can be done if you centralise it and just have a positive flow of data. So don't learn what goes into box 38 on an entry. Learn how to get your data packaged in a way that will help your broker. If that broker's us, happy with that. But, we'd love to be. But if it's not, and you're using another broker, this is still relevant. The efficiency of your broker will be down to the efficiency of your data. Speed is obviously of the element, and with us, what we want to do is put so much repetition and templated work into this that this is where ROBBIE the robot comes in. ROBBIE is very important to us, and we've got some really good partners working on this with us in terms of data integration and actual the management of the robots. And all these robots they're not embedded in our system, they sit across the top and can go in and out of systems as required, whether that's email, port system, customs, back from customs, off to the Irish system. The robot just sits across the top of everything. Very, very big part of what we're doing. Robbie's route map is already mapped out. So once we've got the really important part to us is master data. Once we've got the master data, then we can receive transactional data, which really can be as simple as vehicle number. We don't even need that actually. Where we just need the package's weight and value of what's moving that time, and the SKU code, so that we know what the product is. So product, package's weight and value. That's your load details, because we know a lot of the other data, which is fairly static. We can then receive the load data as XML, CSV, XLS. It can be a PDF if it's a standard format like SAP GTS, for example, and we can OCR scrub it. Or it can be out and out EDI. All comes in through our integration tool, passes through the master data filter, gets passed to Robbie and his brothers, because there are quite a few Robbies, and then they start to populate all of the elements that's required. They then communicate the information back to you and put the document up in a portal if you need it. All of that in minutes. So we're not talking about hours to turn documents around, we're talking minutes, because it has to be. We must not be the bottleneck in this process, and we're not setting out to be. So data's key. So what we'd like you to do is to go onto our website of mybrexit.uk and the section called data, which, believe it or not, is about data. And we've put in there a couple of routines to actually collect data from you. It's quite conversational. It's not overly heavy. We just ask you the essential questions and ask you to give us some start data. Do not think that's the end of it. This data will allow us to actually see what your information is and start to see where the gaps might be and what other information we might require. If we were to ask you everything from stage one, the process would be too onerous, and you would bomb out before you got halfway through it. I'm not being unkind to you there, but there would be so many variables that it's like going on the customs website. There's a part where you forgot where you came in and you don't even know where you are anymore. We mustn't do that. So we're going to ask you just the headlines, and then we're going to start drilling down. And then we'll ask you for your product and origin data. Get used to origin data. Very big part for us is if you have SKU codes, the SKU codes need to be segmented so that they cover different origins. So it's no good saying, for example, you've got a SKU code for a beef burger that's coming from Republic of Ireland. It's the same SKU code for a beef burger that comes from Northern Ireland. Not anymore, it isn't, because you need an EU origin beef burger from the south and a UK origin, or GB origin, I actually call it UK here, the UK origin beef burger from the north. And we need to be able to know that information, because the origin of the goods mostly affects the type of import declaration that's done and what duty is payable. Duty is not payable on where the goods last came from, it's the origin of the product. Complicated area, but we'll get in more detail with it when we see your data. If you don't do the data, Robbie's got nothing to do. We've invested a lot of money in Robbie and his friends, but he's absolutely dependent on the master data filter giving him the information and populating the bits that with respect you will miss out on the transactional level, so we need to have that stored away already. If you don't do this, we'll have too many Robbies and we're going to melt him down. We've warned him already. If Robbie doesn't have a job, we don't make him redundant, we just melt him down and make an ashtray. This is your opportunity to save Robbie. I'm saying nothing else. Save the robot. Let's start a campaign. What do we do when we get the information? We verify the data that you've given us. We make the connections and between the ORI number of the sender, the ORI number of the receiver, what route is that likely to take, what documentation will be required, what is the specific coding on the customs entry. We start to draw all these crossover lines, okay? But we can't do it without data. We fill in the blanks, trust me, there'll be blanks, and we transmit test entries to customs in order that we can test the coding that we think is required, get that accepted by customs, and then lock it in so that the data is now, for us, we know is good on day one. We don't charge for this, and there is no obligation associated with this. You give us your data, we'll test the information, but there's no obligation to use our services from day one or ever. For us, it's something that we've got teams of people waiting to do customs documents. So even if we just use this for training, to be fair, you will get the benefit of it. And or if it's ongoing, then it is training. We need to be training this, testing data flows, and agreeing processes. So no charge, no obligation. Make use of it. Once you've got the data locked in with us, we issue a CCC VIP code. And the reason why we do that is so that when you send us transactional data and you've put your CCC VIP code on it, the robot knows that you've already lodged your master data, and it will save him a lot of time looking for it. He'll just go straight off and find the data relevant to your VIP code. So it just gives you fast track access, and it's also cheaper. We're not we're not particularly saying, look, if you do this process, we can automate it. It therefore becomes cheaper for you. Look, we're setting off in that direction anyway. But what we're actually saying is, if we've given you all of the tools to lodge your master data, so that we can handle the process much faster on day one, and you don't use that opportunity, you're going to pay more. So it's not so much that the process is cheaper. There's almost like a penalty if you don't do it, because otherwise it's got to go manual. And if everybody goes down that route, by 3 hours into Brexit, we will be swamped, and so will every other customs broker, because the volumes are huge, and of course the peaks are always the peaks. You load in the evening, everything ships at night, that type of thing. So get the data in so that we can get the fast track element going and do it in an efficient and economical way. And then you're ready. Wait for day one, which as of now is the 1st of January. It's actually not. It's 2300 hours UK time on the 31st. Because we leave at midnight in Central European time. That just means my New Year's cancelled, but hey ho, whatever. But from your side, providing you keep us up to date with products, you're ready. We're just waiting for day one now. What you must do is always, when you bring a new product online, think customs. If you bring a new product online, tell us about that new product. Otherwise, your master data will be inconsistent with the transaction data when you start to send it. You wait for day one. Day one arrives, everything starts with an export. People focus an awful lot on imports, but obviously there is no import without an export. So once the load is ready to go, send the load data to us in a simplified format, because you've already registered most of your information with us. That passes through the master data filter, and the documents are created. That doesn't mean we're going to have 1 or 2 people sitting in the office. There'll probably be about 50. We're just mapping that out at the moment, but the staff. The team are there to oil and feed ROBBIE, but equally to handle entries that it's too technical for ROBBIE to do because there's too many variables involved. Or equally, if the entry fails for one reason or another, a coding change at chief or something. So the staff are there pretty much there to handle the ongoing jobs, but without the bulk of doing these repetitive full load of yogurt, full load of furniture, same as it was yesterday, same as it was going to be tomorrow. The robotics can take care of most of that, and therefore we can use the team, the personal skills, to their strength to actually handle the problems, to make sure we're ironing everything out, and obviously 20 hours a day. So what we need you to do is make use of our website. It's constantly updated. The download section, which isn't just a dumping ground for things we've produced, which we often find on download sections. Wrote this report a few years ago, bung it on the website because I've got somewhere to put it. We strip that download section out regularly and load it up with only the relevant information. So go to my BREXIT downloads. That also includes white papers on why do I need a deferment account, what's the role of the freight forwarder, and so on and so forth. It's very, very relevant information. We've also in there is our user guide, which includes full data specification of what you would require, or the ways that you can share load data with us, which is either a slick entry screen, a portal which is quite conversational, and a lot of people like that actually. And in fact, they train their staff to use the portal. It takes about an hour to train them, and then that's their customs process done. Or full IT integration if that's the way you want to go. But completely your choice. We're either way, it arrives with us in a format that Robbie's expecting, so we're fine with that. We've also included the border mapping, so we have mapped out the 50 borders, and you're more than welcome to test all of them. We update it, so at the moment it's in its probably worst state because there's no agreements anywhere, and hopefully as time goes on that will improve. And of course the matrix, our very proud Brexit on a page document, which is also available on the download section and will be included when we circulate this webinar anyway. That's us. That's the end of brunch number 2, Brexit lunch. We will do more of these. I hope I haven't given you indigestion or ruined your lunch. We think this format's working pretty well. It's nice and conversational. We're not going to we're more worried about the content than we are about polishing the appearance. So we hope this works well for you, and we look forward to seeing you next time.